Today we're here to talk about public finance and the need for Vermont to take back its own democracy. The 5-member big money majority currently on the Supreme Court of the U.S. has been dismantling modern era election reforms for several years now. They've defined money as speech, corporations as persons with the constitutional rights normally attendant to real human people. Let me make my position clear. Big money is the opposite of free speech. And when it dominates our elections, it is the opposite of democracy. So today we're here at the Democracy Sculpture in Burlington to talk about Vermont's solution to that problem. As our income disparity ominously returns to pre-depression levels, the court seems bent on eliminating political and electoral reforms that have helped us sweep away the rampant corruption of that bygone era of giant trusts, unaccountable financial and industrial magnates. Vermont, so far in a limited way, has said no. Vermont's solution is public finance, so that anyone, regardless of personal wealth, or the wealth of their friends, or the wealth of friendly corporations or PACs, but anyone who has the credibility to meet certain indicators of support can have the money needed to get out the basic information the voters need to make a decision on a fair basis. The standards are difficult. For a lieutenant governor, at least $17,500 from at least 750 Vermonters from all around the state, and with none larger than $50. But as you know, we met them. If we hadn't, you wouldn't be here today. My campaign would have been virtually unknown to Vermonters, a mere footnote to this race that in fact would have been no race at all. Now, my opponent, who was himself free to try to meet those same requirements, but who instead chose to go with private funding, and who is fully capable of raising privately as much and much more than we have done publicly, is complaining about the use of public monies to fund Vermont's elections. So let's address this issue head on with some data. My campaign finances by now are well known. $19,283 from 826 registered Vermont voters only. By the way, that was in 37 days. 100% small contributions, 0% large contributions defined by the state as over $100. No one's voice drowns out any others. With an average contribution of $23.35, the vast majority of Vermonters could conceive of such a contribution for the candidate of their choice. My Republican opponent's finances won't be fully known for this election cycle until well after the November election. So let's look at his 2012 spending against a candidate with far less money than the $200,000 total we have available in this race. $176,429 from 880 entities. I say entities because they are not all Vermont voters. 82% large, 18% small. With an average contribution of over $200, the vast majority of Vermonters could never conceive of such a contribution for any candidate. Talk about unaffordability. The typical Vermonter cannot afford that kind of democracy. So far, for the current 2014 cycle, based on the latest filing of March 15th, the trend is even worse. 100% large, 0% small, and an average contribution of $500. How many Vermonters could afford to do that? Let's take a look. That's the small money picture, and let's take a look at the big money picture. Here's the first part of it. Again, this is for the 2012 campaign cycle, beginning with 40% over $100 contributions, and that's before we even talk about corporations and PACs. This is the really big money. No graph can contain this money, as we have shown here today. This is what the picture looks like, and it's what it's going to continue to look like unless Vermont makes further changes. Altogether, with big money putting up these kinds of numbers, it's fair to ask who gets to speak, who gets listened to, who gets to call the tune. Everyone knows the answer to that question. It's the one who pays the piper. What's the result? People have learned to hate politics, and that's the death knell for democracy. Democracy requires participation and not just opening a big checkbook. Thinking, debating, helping, and yes, running. And all of that requires being informed, not the disinformation put out by organizations with Orwellian names backed by big hidden money. Democracy requires real information put out by candidates who are responsible. And I think that's the key word, responsibility. By qualifying for and accepting public financing, I am responsible in a whole new way to every Vermonter, for they are who is backing my candidacy, not wealthy individuals, corporations, or PACs. What's the cost of that public financing? 29 cents per Vermonter every 2 years. On the other hand, what's the cost of big money campaign finance? How's the middle class doing? How's everyone but the wealthy doing? That's the answer to that question. Clearly, the biggest problems are on the national scale. But as it has done before, Vermont can lead the way on a solution. Until concern for the meaning of the Constitution is restored to a majority of the Supreme Court, we can't entirely stop big money, but we can do a lot to counteract it with public financing of elections. I am thrilled and honored to be part of this movement, but I don't want to be the only one. It's been 10 years since the last one, so in the words of Governor Snelling, it's time to pick up the pace. Let's see 185 flowers bloom, every statewide race, every House, and every Senate race in Vermont, all competitive and all responsible to all Vermonters. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
So you're specifically calling for public financing of all
state races.
Do you know what the cost of that would be?
We've had 2 estimates done. Our campaign has done 2 estimates, and there are many ways to do it, and there are many variables, and of course all of this would be set by the legislature. But both of those estimates, as a practical matter, would come out between $2 million and $2.5 million per election cycle.
If you were, I mean, it's easy to envision, perhaps not easy, but it's possible to envision how you would set up a state public financing system, but a national one gets more complicated. If you think it's expensive to run in Chittenden County, it's probably pretty expensive to run in California.
Right.
So, and you'd have this kind of diverse system supporting.
Well, of course, the states have the rights to run their own elections to a great degree. And a few states already have public finance for many statewide races. Arizona is one example. If I was running for Congress, I would come up with a national plan. But I'm concerned with the state of Vermont. In the state of Vermont, we've shown that it's doable. The numbers are very practical. It's the best investment Vermonters could make is to own their own democracy. And I think the outcomes would serve the majority of Vermonters from a policy level much better than we're doing now. I mean, if you believe in Adam Smith, you believe in economics means anything, you have to believe that who pays the piper is calling the tunes.
Well, is there evidence about that? I mean, with Bill Scott, is there evidence that who's paid the piper has called his tune?
Sure, we have politicians who make a career out of complaining that Vermont is unaffordable. What are the solutions? Cut taxes on the wealthy, cut environmental protections, cut regulations. Sometimes those things are appropriate, but sometimes they are not. There is a much greater panoply of solutions to the problems of the regular working Vermonter than are offered typically in our political system.
So specifically, do you think Bill Scott is providing favors to his donors? Are there specific examples of corruption or corrupting behavior you can point to your opponent?
I have nothing like that on my opponent, so don't go looking for that. I'm saying on a macroeconomic level, who pays gets the benefit of paying. Otherwise, they would be foolish to pay. And economically, big businesses and PACs and the wealthy people who give the money to these entities are not foolish people.
So you have no reason to believe that any of Phil Scott's donors are getting
This is not about Phil Scott. This is not entirely about Phil Scott. He's a symptom of the problem. He's one example of the problem. This goes across Vermont, perhaps not to as great a degree as some other states, certainly, but this is a national problem. It's a Vermont problem that we know that we can deal with in a practical way in Vermont.
What politician in Vermont do you think raises the most corporate money?
That's a good question.
I think it might be Governor Shumlin, just from having perused the campaign finance filings. Do you have any?
I will read you and find out.
Do you have any thoughts about his fundraising practices? I think at least a third of his money came from corporations last time around, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I think anyone who raises money from corporations is subject to you saying so. And to me, I don't take that money. I've never taken that kind of money. My party doesn't take that kind of money, and so I don't have to worry about that for myself. Others have to respond, for themselves.
Do you think Governor Shumlin should refrain from raising corporate money?
I would think that would be wonderful if he did. I think that public financing would be a good solution. It's a little too late for this cycle now, but I think that would be wonderful, and I will suggest that.
But you are trying to get the Democratic nomination.
Absolutely.
And that is a party that don't take.
Absolutely.
So how do you reconcile that? Why do you want that if it's going to compromise you?
Well, it's not going to compromise me, because every penny I got either came from the small donors who gave $19,000 or the taxpayers who are giving the balance of the $200,000. So none of that's going to compromise me. We have critical issues in Vermont, including health care, which is generally not supported by the large corporations. We need to reform health care to work for the majority of Vermonters. And in order to get that done, I will team up with anyone who is working on that issue in a big way and who can help get that done. And the Democratic Party is doing that. This governor is doing that. And there are just a very few issues that really are overwhelming to the state of Vermont. So I'm going to work with them on that as best I can.
But if you win,
we will still continue to disagree on various issues, including campaign finance. Although I will plan on working with the governor on putting forward a very aggressive public financing option for all the statewide races, as I've mentioned.
If you win the Democratic nomination, presumably the party will spend money on your candidacy.
No.
They will not?
No.
Okay.
They will not. They cannot by law. We're going to spend $200,000. In fact, we're going to spend a little less because after the election, if you have bills that come in and you're over $200,000, there's no way to pay them. They cannot be paid. So we're going to have to actually spend a little less than $200,000. And no one can spend a penny. You can volunteer, but no one can spend a penny on my race. If I get anything from the Democratic Party, I will have to pay for it at a fair market value.
So in any coordinated campaign efforts they might do for other candidates, they cannot.
We have to pay for that. Legally, we can't overpay and subsidize them, and we can't underpay and be subsidized by them. We are so constrained, and appropriately so, that no one can give us anything. And I still have people saying, oh, I'll contribute, and I have to keep telling them, no, you can't contribute, not a penny, but you can work. And that's what we need. This is a grassroots campaign. It's going to be based on people working primarily. And, the money goes very fast. We're not going to hire a lot of, wealthy, out-of-state consultants to do fancy stuff for us. Everything we're spending is in-state, by the way, to the absolute degree we can, unless there's something that just doesn't exist in the state.
What do you say to the Lieutenant Governor's argument that this money could be spent on hiring more DCF workers, for instance, or other critical services?
Well, I really like his example of potholes, because the corporations that fill the potholes are the ones that gave him a big check right after the election last time. So it could not be part of that, could not be known by the voters during that election. He should answer to that if you want to answer to something. So I thought that was very interesting about potholes. The fact of the matter is, we're talking, for example now, we're talking about financing health care. And we're talking about, of a $5 billion package, we're mostly focused on the $2 billion that's out of pocket in premiums that people are paying. Now, we're, in terms of public financing, in terms of Vermonters 100% owning their own elections, we're talking about on the order of $2 million. Now, which is more important? You own your election, then you democratically decide how that $2 billion is raised, or you let people who are elected by corporate money make that decision. I think the answer is obvious. So the cost of democracy, it turns out, happily, is very, very low. The cost of failing to make the right decisions on something like healthcare or overall economic development, those costs totally outweigh that. 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1.
Do you think you can win the election with only public financing?
Absolutely, but the public financing is just the money part. I can win the election because I have a better record, my views are more in line with the people of Vermont, I'm going to have more volunteers, as we've already demonstrated, in a very short amount of time. Vermonters in every corner of this state are going to be working very hard on this campaign because they agree with me and not the Lieutenant Governor. We need to work really hard, and we can win the election on that basis.
But some Vermonters, obviously, who don't support you are seeing money that could go to other areas instead go to you. Why would they want that to be the case?
Not a penny of it is going to me. Let's be very clear about this. This is about a democracy and elections in a democracy and getting out the basic information people need to make a decision.
Going to getting you elected, I should say.
Going to get them information. This money is buying them information. We could have a system where the candidate has nothing to do with it. That, let's say, you know, it's like in baseball. The sports writers make the decisions. Maybe you guys could make the decisions. But the way we have it now is the candidate gets to put out the message the way they want to put it out. It's a matter of free speech, and the public puts in a small amount of money. In the scheme of things, a small amount of money to get that information out. And as I say, I think the critical thing is, because I'm taking that public money, I'm responsible to the public in a way that your typical candidate who takes big money from corporations and PACs is not responsible. I expect the public, through you and through other entities, to be checking every fact I put out, and if I'm wrong on something, I expect to be called on that. But obviously we have a responsibility to put out the facts, and that's what we're doing.
I feel like you're at a disadvantage because you're up against so much money being spent by other candidates.
Well, it's not clear yet. So far, the Lieutenant Governor in previous races has not had a serious opposition with the kind of money we have. Certainly not the kind of organization I hope to have. And the Lieutenant Governor has not raised this much money yet. And also keep in mind that when the legislature passed this kind of legislation, they're very carefully looking at the value of incumbency. It's very hard to defeat an incumbent, especially when an incumbent spends all of their office and all of their time not pursuing advancing healthcare reform, but pursuing advancing their perception as a nice guy. That's a real problem for the state of Vermont. We can actually turn that office into something that helps people get critical issues done, particularly healthcare, particularly the environment, particularly renewable energy that the state needs to get done.